Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris back again, back to our regularly scheduled format as we cover Rhapsody's Symphony of Enchanted Lands, going back over 25 years to October 5th, 1998. If that doesn't make you feel old, my friend, I don't know what will. How you doing, bud?
Doing good. Getting back to the normal format here, which is cool. We didn't announce this album ahead of time, so surprise. But this is I was looking through our history, and I noticed we had only ever really talked about one Rhapsody album before, not counting the most recent Torilli Leone Rhapsody album that we did before Prog Power a couple of years ago. But we had done Legendary Tales, which I think, if memory serves, I think I gave you the choice between Legendary Tales and Symphony of Enchanted Lands, and you chose Legendary Tales. So now we're circling back, and we're going to talk about the second release. These were the two albums by Rhapsody that came out while we were still in high school. I believe the following album, I think we would have been freshmen in college by the time Dawn of Victory was released. I remember listening to that album in college quite a bit, but this is definitely harkens back to a simpler time, at least for me. So I have lots of thoughts on this, and I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Nice, as am I. It's an interesting choice. Definitely a formative band, I think, for both of us in many ways. But I'll leave that discussion to the side just for a little bit. I'm excited to talk about new music that I've been listening to, because now that we're done with our Best of 2023 episode, I've kind of been focusing on a lot of new stuff, and I guess I'd be remiss not to mention the fact our lists are going to be out for everyone to see by the time this episode drops for our non-Patreon folks. Lot of good comments that I've seen so far about the last episode and our recap of 2023 as a whole. That's always a highlight for me. But I can't believe it's another year in the books, and now we forge forward. I'm curious to see if there was anything in particular that you've heard. We're only 2.5 weeks into 2024, but I heard a good album, two good albums really I wanted to mention. The first was the newest Magnum album, Here Comes the Rain. This is a band that, they've been around forever. They play that, accessible brand of hard rock that I think is very, very enjoyable. And obviously a lot of people are familiar with Bob Catley, the singer, from his work with Avantasia. But I would never say that any of the albums are tens or that they're the most spectacular thing you've ever heard. But every time I put them on, I'm like, I enjoy this. This is good stuff. And the new one is no different. Again, it's called Here Comes the Rain. Definitely worth a listen. And another band from England, or I should say a project, if you will, Damian Wilson has recorded a couple of albums now with a guy by the name of Adam Wakeman. And I have to admit, I never knew who Adam Wakeman was, so I decided to look him up. And it turns out he's actually playing keyboards for Ozzy and has been for some time. And these two guys have worked together on Headspace and some other projects. But they do these essentially acoustic rock or progressive rock albums together. And if Damian Wilson is singing on it, I'm going to give it a listen, just because the guy, much like a Daniel Hyman or something like that, I love his voice. He can do no wrong. He's unique. He sounds different, and these albums are no different. So the two of these guys just put a album out together. Long overdue. It had been a few years since the last one, and it's called Can We Leave the Light On Longer? 10 tracks. Progressive rock, acoustic stuff, very easily digestible, kind of easy music to listen to while working in the background. Definitely worth a listen. There's a couple of standout tracks on there as well. So just a couple of things that I wanted to mention that bands that we haven't really talked about so much in the past.
Yeah, Magnum's one of those bands that I've always wanted to check out because I love Bob Catley's vocals on the Avantasia albums that he appears on, and the live, CDs and DVDs that he's been on, and just a big fan. But I don't really know that band very well, and it's one of those things where you look at their discography and you just like throw your hands up and you're like, never mind.
It's daunting. You look at it and you're like, I don't even know where to start, you know?
Yeah. Marillion is another band like that for me where like I've always been interested in listening to them, and that's like, oh God.
And they've had different that's another story for another podcast, but they've had so many different iterations and eras. Lot of meat on the bone there. That's a band we definitely need to cover.
I think I'll give the new Magnum a listen and maybe just start with the latest one and work backwards. I guess.
Think it's representative. I really do. I think you'll enjoy it. I don't know that it's going to be your album of the year, but I think you're going to enjoy it. And I think that at the end, you're going to be like, I enjoyed that. And you might even go back and check out some other stuff. But if you're looking for a place to start, no better spot than the new one. I'll say that much.
Yeah. I did that with I believe a couple of bands in 2023 where I was just kind of like, oh, what the hell? Narnia was one of them. It was like I'd never listened to a full Narnia album before. I was like, oh, let me give this new Narnia album a shot, and I ended up really liking it. I think it ended up making my top 25 for the year. It was a really enjoyable album, so I think I will continue doing that with some of these other bands I'm not as familiar with. I've only had a chance to listen to 2 new albums this year. One of them is from I think we had only mentioned this on our bonus episode for January, so I'm not repeating myself to most people, but the Grandmaster, which is a project from former Metal Exchange guest Jens Ludwig of Ed Guy fame. They have a new album called Black Sun. It's him with Alessandro Del Vecchio, who also is a part of Edge of Forever and plays keyboards for Yorn Land, and
is on every Frontiers release, it seems. Yeah,
it seems that way. He played keyboard on the most recent Archon Angel album. He's in Sunstorm, and the Grandmaster, I guess, is him and Jens's baby. And they have a new vocalist on this album, Per Johansen from Denmark, who sings with the band Fate. He is replacing Nando Fernandez, who was the
Luchador?
Yes, the Luchador. He was a Brazilian vocalist on the first album titled Skywards. And this album is called Black Sun. It's pretty much in the same vein as that first album, so if you enjoyed that, I think that you will enjoy this as well. But the album that
let me just cut you off for 1 second. I just wanted to mention one other thing about Alessandro Del Vecchio. I joke about him and being on every Frontiers release. He's actually their in-house producer, so he produces so many albums for the label that like he finds his way onto a lot of them. So I say it tongue in cheek, but there actually is a reason for it. So okay. I just wanted to insert that.
That makes sense. And then the other album that I listened to that I really enjoyed and is my album of the year for right now is Exit Eden's Femme Fatale. This was a 4-woman fronted band that is now a 3-woman fronted band. The original vocalist, the incomparable Amanda Somerville, she had left the project. She was part of it for their first album, Rhapsody in Black, but the band continues on with Marina La Tarraca, who is the vocalist from Phantom Elite, Clementine Delany, who is the vocalist for Visions of Atlantis, and Anna Brunner, who is the vocalist for League of Distortion and has also done some live vocals with Camelot in the past. Their first album was entirely a covers album, if memory serves. I don't know that there were not any original songs on it. This album is actually about half and half. It's about half covers, half original tunes, and there's some really good original stuff. We had mentioned the song Run that they worked on with Marco from formerly of Nightwish. That's a really excellent track. There's some really cool covers, including It's a Sin from Pet Shop Boys, Separate Ways from Journey, Poison from Alice Cooper, Alone from Heart, and the aforementioned Marillion. They did Kaylee as well. But I just enjoyed this album on a whole. I thought the covers were really well done, and I thought the original material was really well done. And I think this is a really awesome step forward for this band. Which, because I kind of was assuming that first album might have just been a one-off. So it seems like they're continuing on, and this is a really a great step in the right direction.
Yeah, well said. I liked it as well. I'm curious to see if it has the staying power, because there are so many covers on it, but they do a good job with them. And the original material was surprisingly good. So I hope they transition out of the covers, maybe put on just a couple as bonus tracks on some of the albums. But lots of promise from the original compositions. So good stuff. And now we move to Rhapsody, and it's funny because, you know, Legendary Tales comes out in 1997. Just a year later, they come out with this follow-up release. And as much as I like Legendary Tales, and obviously it's something we've talked about in the archives, and I remember that discussion well, because I remember it took a little while for us to actually do that album, which is somewhat shocking to me when you really think about it. But I say that to say, you know, it's a seminal release in many ways, just because of how impactful it was on power metal in general and symphonic metal. It was, you know, nothing sounded like this in 1997. But for my money, I think they basically took all the stuff I liked about Legendary Tales and kind of ratcheted up a little bit on this album just a year later. I thought the production was better. I thought the compositions were better. I thought it was more well balanced. So as much as I have a soft spot in my heart for Legendary Tales, I always thought this was the better release. So I was looking forward to covering it with you, because I don't know if I'm in the minority there. I know you're a very big fan of that first album. Just by way of kind of recollection, you would have rated Legendary Tales 9.25, which is a really high score. I gave it an 8.5. I'm curious if this touches that rarefied air, because once you get to 9.5, you're talking about like Desert Island all-time great discs. And it was nice to go back and listen to it, because it had certainly been a while for me.
Yeah, I think that those are all very good points. I think that we're going to be in a little bit of disagreement, because I think that this for me is of the first three Rhapsody albums, probably my least favorite of the three.
Interesting.
Not to say that I don't love it and it's not a great album, but I stick by my original score for Legendary Tales, which, like you said, was a 9.25. And I went back and I listened to Dawn of Victory right after I listened to Symphony of Enchanted Lands, just to see if I was listening through, you know, rose-colored headphones, I guess, just to coin a phrase. But because I had always really held Dawn of Victory very high, and I listened to it a lot when I was in college, along with, there's a couple of albums that came out around that time that I remember, that The Dark Ride by Halloween, the Keepers of Jericho, that first Halloween tribute, and the first Avantasia metal opera. Those albums all kind of came out around the same time, and I listened to all of them pretty obsessively. But I went back and I enjoyed Dawn of Victory overall just a bit more than Symphony of Enchanted Lands, and I think I like it even more than Legendary Tales. It's probably my favorite of the three, and we'll, I'm sure, cover that album in long form in the future. So just as a kind of a spoiler alert to my score to forthcoming, it won't be higher than a 9.25. I'll say that.
And so when you went back to Dawn of Victory, did it hold up for you? Because without, again, going in too deep in the weeds there, for me, I always thought that was the weakest of the three. And I'm not going to say it didn't click. I just didn't think it was as good as the other two.
Yeah, it definitely held up. I still think that it's the best of the three. I think it's the most well-balanced, and I think that I don't know. There's just some songs on Symphony of Enchanted Lands that I think are like good but not great, and it doesn't have as many of the flat out bangers that Legendary Tales had, that, you know, your Land of Immortals and your Flames of Revenge. And there was just so many songs that were just like, this one I think has more, they're trying, I think there's more symphonic elements than in that first album. It's more of an orchestral album, and it has more of that going on than, it's less power metal than Legendary Tales and more symphonic. And not that that's a bad thing. I just think that I enjoyed the previous release a bit more. I don't know if I've always felt that way. I just always remember holding both those first two albums in very high regard. That said, I still think this is a really, really excellent album. I just think that it kind of dips for me in the middle. It starts out really strong and it ends really strong, and then it dips a little in the middle. Whereas I think the album prior to and the album the following stays pretty consistent from start to finish. So that's really my only gripe, I guess I could say. But I still really like this album a lot.
Okay, I think that's fair. I mean, I'm not going to say it's a perfect album, but again, spoiler, I think it's going to be a little bit higher than, and it's funny because we never do the ratings up front, but I feel like we're letting the cat out of the bag a little bit. I think this is, for me, a little bit better than Legendary Tales, and I think my score will ultimately reflect that. For those that don't know, Luca Turilli and Alex Staropoli on obviously guitars and keyboards respectively are composing all of this music, and truly the word is composed, because this is some really orchestral compositions here that to say that they pen these songs, I don't think does it justice. But Luca Turilli writes all the lyrics, and obviously the rest of the band, Fabio Leone on vocals, Alessandro Loda on bass, and Daniel Carbonera on drums and percussion. And there's a million guests on this thing, from Sasha Paith to Thomas Retke of Heaven's Gate, as he has worked with Luca in the past, and just a number of other musicians that worked on everything from the harpsichord to the contrabass, the cello, violin, oboe, etc. I mean, the list goes on and on. But they really went all in here in terms of the production and the scope of the sound that they were trying to achieve. And I think they do a nice job, because I think that in many ways it does have a much fuller classical sound as compared with the first album. And I think that's part of the attraction for me.
Yeah, again, I can't really disagree with any of that. It seems like they took what was their goal with Legendary Tales, and really, maybe just because of the success of that first album, they really went and dove into, you know, adding more of those classical instruments and just really blending that symphonic style with the power metal style even more so. This just feels, I mean, the fact that it has symphony in the title, like, really tells the story. Like, I just think that it has more of a symphonic and almost theatrical feel to it compared to the previous album. And I think that they continue on that road with the subsequent albums. But this, I feel like, is where they really, I don't know if it had anything to do with like a budget, and then they actually had more of a budget this time around, and they were able to just do more and actually have all these like instruments. This was always one of those bands where I so badly wanted to see them play live with like the choruses and the orchestras, and just have like the whole presentation. I thought would have been the coolest thing, and like a Trans-Siberian Orchestra style, but with Rhapsody. I don't know that it would sell nearly as many tickets, but I just think it was something I always was hesitant about getting excited about seeing Rhapsody live, because I knew that it would be so difficult to recreate that sound that is, and this album especially, there's just so much going on that goes beyond guitars and bass and drums. That said, they do a hell of a job live in spite of that. But I think you do lose just some of that by having some of these, you know, classical instruments being piped in and stuff. And a lot of it, I think, is recreated by a keyboard It's kind of insane to think about how the last time we saw Rhapsody play live, they didn't even have a keyboard player on stage. Like all of this stuff was piped in, and it was literally just Fabio and Luca and the drummer and the bass player and the other guitar player, and they sounded phenomenal. But I mean, it just I think live you get more of just this is a power metal band. You kind of lose some of that symphonic part of it. And this is kind of a reminder of just how symphonic this band really was, right? And especially in those early days, there was really not a lot like this at this time.
No, and I agree. And we often talk about how live bands without keyboard players suffer. Sabaton always comes to mind from those early Sabaton shows where they actually had the live keyboards. It made all the difference in many ways. Rhapsody might be one of the anomalies because they're so keyboard laden and so many different elements to the overall sound that, number one, from a cost production standpoint, they couldn't do it live. They couldn't replicate that sound live. But there's so much going on that you almost need to pipe it in, but they do it in such a way where it doesn't make the live show suffer. So I would consider them kind of an anomaly in that regard. But yeah.
I still think it would be better, though, with like the full Monty, you know?
Yeah, but would it be too much almost? Would it be just such a wall of sound that it would actually be hard to digest? I just throw that out there. I don't know.
I hope so.
I'd love to see it.
I mean, just one time, I just think it would be super cool. It's a shame Christopher Lee is no longer with us to narrate the whole thing.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons this album is not perfect. We'll get there. We'll get there. But this album kicks off with your standard symphonic power metal intro. It's called Epicus Furor, and it really is this upbeat, dark intro track that could have easily been on like the Lord of the Rings soundtrack. The operatic nature, I think, of this track is a Luca Turilli staple, and I don't want to take Alex Staropoli out of the mix, but I feel like that has Luca's thumbprints all over it, and it certainly gets you pumped for the first song, Emerald Sword, which might be the most well-known Rhapsody song of them all. I want to just say, I mean, if it isn't number one, it's absolutely in the top three. And I'll get to that momentarily, but I want you to chime in. Talk to me about Epicus Furor. What a way to start this thing.
Yeah, it's, I think I don't know that there is a Rhapsody album that doesn't start out with that 1 to 1.5 minute, classical style intro. They did it on Legendary Tales, although it was more of like a kind of a harpsichord kind of sound, whereas this is like the full orchestra, just like very bombastic, a word that we used to use a lot more often and then became aware of how often we were using it and then cut back a little bit, and now I'm bringing it back.
Back.
So yeah, and it really makes for the perfect setup for Emerald Sword, and I have to agree. I would be surprised if Rhapsody considered something else their most well-known or most popular song. I'm pretty sure it's pretty much how every form of Rhapsody that has somehow split off of this band finishes their live shows, whether it's Rhapsody of Fire with Alex Staropoli, or if it's Luca Turilli's Rhapsody, or I don't know. There's so many Rhapsodies, or there were so many. I think at this point it really is just Rhapsody of Fire. I don't know that Luca Turilli and Fabio are like an active group at this point. It sounds like, from what I've heard in interviews and stuff, it sounds like Luca's kind of moving away from this style, and like that show we saw at Prague Power was kind of like almost like a goodbye to the old stuff. It was, I said this before, but I was, the whole reason I chose that new album was because I wanted to familiarize myself with this new material, and they came out and they didn't play a damn note from it.
Shocked me. Shocked me.
It was similar to what Stradivarius did that year, where I think that they were just kind of like, we're going to play for the old school fans, play the old shit, as Pat would say repeatedly. But they both did it. It was amazing. I really wasn't complaining at all. It was just very surprising. But it seems like that was kind of like a swan song for Luca doing that style of music. It seems like he's moving more towards the maybe the classical side of things, and not less of the metal side. That said, I remember I bought the box set for this album when it came out, and it came with all this wild stuff. It was like dragon tattoos and like a necklace and these like cards, and it had a book with like a very like deep bios and like all the lore of the first two albums. It was really interesting stuff. And I just remember Luca Turilli, one of his biggest inspirations was the Keeper era Halloween albums, and it was like he took that kind of style of power metal and married it with this symphonic, like just huge sound. And then you bring in Fabio Leone with these iconic vocals, and it just all comes together. And Emerald Sword is kind of just like the epitome of all of that. It's just such a, I would say that not only is it like Rhapsody's most well-known song, but I think most people would say it's like one of the great power metal, epic, anthems.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And in many ways, like I said, the song is really synonymous with the band at this point. That wonderful riff that just kicks it off. I mean, it's forever ingrained in my head. But what I think really pops to me is like the violins and all these classical instruments that just add these layers on top to what's otherwise just a good power metal song. Good verses, this huge, catchy chorus. And what struck me as I went back this time is how young Fabio sounded. Like, you could tell there was not a lot of wear and tear on the vocals at that point. Not that he doesn't sound good. I mean, obviously I like the new Angra album quite a bit. But he just kind of goes up an octave towards the end of this song, and he just starts wailing on this thing. And it is so refreshing to hear. And that instrumental section on this really was reminiscent of the first album in many ways. This is like your classic Rhapsody song, and if you don't like this, I think it's fair to say you're not going to be a fan of this band.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair to say, yes.
We get into Wisdom, and it's also just one of those songs that I think we gravitated towards a lot as kids, but as I've gotten older, there's other songs on this album that I actually like more, and I point to Wisdom of the Kings as one of those songs. I went back and I listened to this week, and I'm like, you know what? I don't know that I would have guessed it going in, but it is my song of the week. I am a huge fan of Wisdom of the Kings. So without kind of, getting into the details, let's give it a listen, and then I'll come back and I'll kind of walk you through why I chose this track for my song of the week. The song starts off with this whimsical intro, and you never know where it's going to go. And then all of a sudden, this keyboard-driven, upbeat, but just a tad slower than Emerald Sword, this power metal song comes on, and you're like, you know what? It blew me away, and it was like I was listening to it again for the first time, even though I know the song, rather well. I love the verses, and I love how they layer Fabio's vocals as part of this, because you really hear it pop when you hear, it's like Fabio's singing in 3 different registers at the same time. Tons of harpsichord on this thing, which is a nice touch, and an instrumental section that comes right out of a movie score for like a fantasy movie. This to me is the quintessential track on this album. It's my song of the week. I know you're a fan of this one as well.
Yeah, it's my song of the week also. I've always loved this song a lot. And I remember I believe it was if it wasn't this album, it might have been the Dawn of Victory box set came with a bonus disc that had like a a multimedia section. This was a thing that they used to do where you'd pop the disc into your computer and there'd be music videos and all this extra stuff. And I remember I was like, oh, there's a music video for Wisdom of the Kings, and it really is just one of those videos where it's just like the band playing other songs live and they're just interspersing random clips, and it kind of looks like they're playing it live, but
not really.
Obviously not. But I always thought that was like super cool, and when I would eventually add it to the ever growing mix of Power Hour videos, I was always more excited to hear this song than I was for Emerald Sword. And I think Emerald Sword just got kind of overplayed.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you something that I found really interesting about these early Rhapsody albums is that I always thought that the third track on all of these early albums was always like this underrated gem after these like really like well-known opener. So like going back to Legendary Tales, you had Era Tenox, which was the intro, going into Warrior of Ice, and Warrior of Ice is like one of the most memorable songs on the album, if not in the history of Rhapsody. But then like it follows with Rage of the Winter, which is such an underrated tune, I think, compared to some of the other songs
I agree.
on Legendary Tales. Symphony of Enchanted Lands, similar. One of my favorite songs on Dawn of Victory is actually Triumph from My Magic Steel, which follows Dawn of Victory, which is the second track on that, which follows a 2-minute symphonic intro. And then, going to Power of the Dragon Flame, which was like the final chapter of this story arc of these first few albums. Power of the Dragon Flame, the title track, followed Knight Rider of Doom, which followed a minute and a half instrumental, classical style song. So it's kind of like Rhapsody kind of had a little bit of like almost like a
pattern.
Yeah, thank you. A pattern like on some of these albums. And then like the next song would be a little bit more chill. And then the fifth track would be like a little bit more wild. And so I think that they kind of stuck with that in here. But yeah, Wisdom of the Kings, I think, is just an underrated Rhapsody song. And if I heard them play it live, I can't recall if I have in the past. I'll have to look that up. But I know I would have gotten very excited to hear that. I have to pull up the set list from Atlanta just to kind of jog my memory as to what they did play Wisdom of the Kings, and I'm sure I probably marked out for it.
It's
right
funny,
after Emerald Sword, no less. So
nice. It's funny as I went back to this, I didn't think it's been a while since we've chosen the same song of the week. I had another one pegged, and I'm curious if it was in contention or maybe your second choice, if you will. So when we get there, I'll mention it. But after two just gems, they go into this like interlude, Heroes of the Lost Valley. And it starts with the sound of running water. And then all of a sudden the harpsichord and the flute kick in. It loses me a bit when they start with the horses neighing and the absolutely god-awful narrator. It's just a bit too cheesy for my taste, but it really is just a segue into Eternal Glory, which kind of reminds me of this dark march for the first minute of this tune, almost like the Wizard of Oz when they're storming the castle type of thing. And it begins to pick up speed a bit, but it remains very dark and brooding, which is kind of a theme for this album. I think this album, by and large, was just darker than the original album, and I don't know if that's because of the story or just because of the approach to the songwriting, but just a dark album in spots. The verses are very slow, almost plotting, but it builds to this bigger chorus. Not my favorite song on the album, but I do appreciate how the band was maturing in their approach to the songwriting. And then you get to this instrumental section, which almost has like a Gaelic quality to it, which is kind of odd, but kind of cool. A bit long-winded, but an interesting track, I would say.
The narrator, I do need to bring it up because I think that he got brought over to the Luca Turilli albums as well. Because if I'm pretty sure he was part of Ancient Forest of Elves.
Sir J. Lansford is his name, by the way.
Yeah. Christopher Lee, he is not. I'll just say that. It's a little bit. Christopher Lee kind of brings a gravitas to what is arguably some, cheesy source material. And I think that the guy on this album kind of just adds more cheese to the cheese.
It's like taking grated cheese and putting it on top of a cheese salad. I mean, like it just...
Yeah, but that actually sounds good, and whereas this narration is not. I remember even thinking it was goofy when I was young. I mean, this album came out when we were like 16 years old, and I still was like, what come on. Obviously the band, felt like they needed to have a better narrator because they went and got one of the all-time
best
greats.
Narrator possible.
Yeah, who actually could sing too, which was a bonus. So yeah, not much to say about Heroes of the Lost Valley. It really is kind of just a segue track, but Eternal Glory, yeah. I do believe that I didn't have the time to dig back into the story, but I do believe that this is kind of a darker portion of the story, and I think that the lyrics and the music kind of represent that, and I think that's what you're kind of hearing with the darkness, especially this and Beyond the Gates of Infinity that follows. It's like 15 total minutes of like pretty dark content. And I think that makes for kind of cool because like Rhapsody, if you're including that first album and the first few tracks of this album, they've been pretty upbeat up to this point. So now we're kind of, as any good RPG would have, there's a kind of a darker element here. This song was actually written before Legendary Tales. It is on their demo, which is called Eternal Glory. I believe it is the only song on that demo that didn't appear on Legendary Tales, so they must have held this one in their pocket to be used at a later time. So, yeah, I think this is a really good tune. It's long, but it's has like lots of different parts to it and stuff. And yeah, there's like a part where it gets like really, I don't know, it can get like really pretty dark. But I do like that it kind of flows and tells a story, and it's not like a 7.5 minute track that's repetitive. It really
it definitely moves. I'll give it credit for that. It's just a little bit much, and then they follow it up, like you said, with Beyond the Gates of Infinity, which is another 7+ minute song. Smack dab in the middle of this thing. What are your thoughts on this? I'll share mine momentarily.
Yeah, this I think is more of that. It kind of has a little bit more of a darkness to it. I mean, they're singing about eating bowels, and it's
sounds like Wednesday around these parts. What can I say?
For real. It's not terribly different from Eternal Glory, where it's almost the same length. It kind of has like these different portions to it where there's, parts where it slows down and parts where it's more symphonic, and it's a power metal song at heart, but there's some like real kind of creepiness towards the end of it. I've always thought this was one of the darker Rhapsody songs, like of all of them, really.
Yeah, and that's why I say this album just has a darker feel in general in many respects. I almost forgot about this song. When I went back to it, it took me a while. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this. Kind of proggy in many ways. It's all over the place, and there's changes of pace both in terms of tempo and the way that they kind of go into an acoustic guitar in spots, but then there's other places where it's extremely dark and heavy. But Fabio sounds great on this tune, and it's very unique. It has this quirky bridge, and then you get into the instrumental section around 4 minutes or 4.5 minutes in, and it's a dead ringer for something that would have been on the Castlevania Symphony of the Night soundtrack. And then the rest of the song has like Symphony X vibes, which you'd never expect from a power metal band. But it's an interesting tune. Like I said, I forgot about it, but going back to it, it really it's one of the more interesting tracks on the album. I still don't know what my thoughts are on it, but I like it. I don't know if I love it, but it's a lot to sink your teeth into.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at with, kind of the whole middle of this album. Probably the next track, Wings of Destiny, is my favorite of the middle portion of the album, but I just think that like the middle portion of the album is good to very good, but not great. And I think that's kind of when I was saying there's a bit of a dip in the middle for me. That said, Wings of Destiny, one of my all-time favorite power ballads. I feel like there wasn't a, to me, there wasn't like a real ballad on Legendary Tales. Like Echoes of Tragedy it was kind of somber, but it didn't really have almost like a love song kind of vibe to it. Whereas like this really does. I always liked it, and it has like the flutes. It's just this very baroque-esque kind of just chill, mellow ballad. And I just thought it's probably one of my favorite of the Rhapsody ballads that they've done over the years. I think it's a really great tune, and it's blowing my mind going back and looking at this set list from Atlanta, because they played a lot from this album. They played Emerald Sword, Wisdom of the Kings, Eternal Glory, Wings of Destiny, and Symphony of Enchanted Lands.
Yeah,
it's like crazy. Half the album.
Yeah, over half the album because of some of the songs they chose. Just going back to Wings of Destiny for a second, it's like you have the ballad thing going on. It's a bit cheesy, but what I'll say is in many ways it's almost like a Fabio Leone vocal solo. And I think of like the great Italian singers like a Pavarotti or something like that. And this is like Fabio's attempt at, just belting out some of this like miraculous stuff. It's almost like the song is secondary to Fabio's vocals in many ways, but it works. He does a phenomenal job. And the album needed something like this because it's darker. It's a little bit slower than, Rage of the Winter or something like that from the last album, but it needed this like break in the action, if you will, because you get to Dark Tower of Abyss and now you're talking about this really neoclassical power metal tune in many ways. And it's a song that's like, I don't know if it's their best, but it definitely is memorable. And when you hear it, like between the church organ in spots and the fact that they have this really catchy, solid chorus, I like this song a lot. And it's another one of those songs that's kind of buried on the back end of this disc, but it's a really memorable tune. The one problem I think that I have with it, again, they use these spoken word parts, which just kind of kill the mood a little bit, and it takes you out of the moment. But the song is actually quite good, and it provides nice contrast to Wings of Destiny.
I absolutely love just the just that violin intro. Like it really sounds like just a symphony orchestra, a very like highly classical piece. This reminds me of like a library in Castlevania, that kind of song. And the funny thing is that I was playing Symphony of the Night at the time that I got this album. So to me, like this album and that game really go hand in hand, at least in my memory. But yeah, I agree with you. This, I think, is where the album starts to pick up again for me. Because I think it's just, they do such a good job of combining that classical music with metal. Like it starts out, you think you're listening to a classical song, and then all of a sudden, your guitars and your drums come in, and then here we go. I think this is one of the better songs on the album. I love those chords of the keyboards, and it's has kind of like an old organ or a harpsichord kind of sound to it, but it really adds to the medieval feel of the entire thing, because I mean it's a story. It's literally a medieval story. If you read the story, it's a campaign right out of Dungeons and Dragons, in all honesty. And there's the main character, one of the main characters in the story is a dragon. There's a dragon, a big red dragon on the cover of the album. Yeah, I like this song quite a bit, and I kind of forgot that I liked it as much as I did, because I just feel like a lot of the middle of this album kind of, in my mind, all kind of
blends together.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you get to Riding the Winds of Eternity towards the back end, and it's like before this gigantic epic title track. This orchestration and the way this starts is like this triumphant, almost victory sounding song. But the song itself is actually one of the bigger bangers on the album. It's very heavy. It's very tight. And I would argue it's two really good tunes in a row on the back end of this thing. Albeit this one's a lot more straightforward, and the keyboards are just so good throughout this thing. I would have guessed that this was going to be your song of the week if we hadn't chose Wisdom of the Kings. My guess was that this is the one you would have chosen. Was it?
Yeah, I
was
mean,
it in contention?
it's a good song. I like it. I like it a lot too. I really think the last 3 tracks on this album are really good. The band released a compilation album in 2004, which was kind of like the greatest hits of the Emerald Sword saga. And this song was on there with Wings of Destiny, Wisdom of the Kings, and Emerald Sword. Those were the selections from Symphony of Enchanted Lands, and it certainly deserved to be on that list. It's one of the shorter songs on the album, not counting the segues. I think it is the shortest of the full length songs. It slows down towards the end and gets kind of emotional, with the pianos and everything.
Yeah.
And then it just picks up again and it kicks back in. And it is a very good song. It's probably in my top 3 or 4 on this album. I still think Wisdom of the Kings is the song to beat on this album. I think it's just such a banger, and like it doesn't, it's not super long the way Eternal Glory and Beyond the Gates of Infinity are well over 7 minutes. But yeah, this is a really good song too, and I don't really blame you for thinking that it might be a choice for Song of the Week for me.
Rhapsody would become synonymous with some really long, epic tunes, and I think the title track here, which ends the album proper, is no different. And I say that because you're talking about a 13-plus minute song that kind of caps this thing off, and it from Jump Street, it has this big epic feel, and it takes a little while to get going. It kind of comes out a little slow out of the gate, but when it does, it has this amazing way of having Fabio just soar over the rest of the band. And what's interesting, and I never noticed it until this week, but it has a bit of a Man-O-War feel to it in some of the passages, just in terms of the way that it kind of builds, and the song just builds and builds and builds. But it's very well done, and there's also parts of this where it harkens back to other pieces of the album, which I thought is a really nice touch. Something Queensryche does with Eyes of a Stranger, for example. Really well done. It is not my favorite tune. It's a little bit much, but at the same time, I do think it is a perfect end to the album, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I really like this song, and I was really excited that they played it when we saw them. And I think they probably cut out some of the dramatic stuff from the beginning of the song, because this song is actually broken into four parts. And I think that it's the third part where the song really picks up, and that's the meat of the song. The beginning of the song is this almost like a dirge. I think in the story, it's meant to be kind of like a, what's the word I'm looking for when, a eulogy for the fallen dragon in the story. And then
gets you every time.
Yeah, it's very emotional, but then it just kicks in with that, like, oh man, that violin with the it just has such a medieval, like, swinging your grog back and forth, and like, at the Ren Fair, like it's once this song gets going, man, this is one of my favorite songs on the album. I toyed with making it my song of the week. It probably was my runner-up. I just think Rhapsody does such a good job of making these long, epic tunes. Like Legendary Tales, the title track was 7.5 or almost 8 minutes long, and then they were just like, hold my mead, and we're like, here's 13 minutes of pure unadulterated,
cheese.
Yeah, like just medieval cheese, but in the best sort of way. I absolutely love this song. It reminds me sort of, not really in any sort of musical way, but it reminds me of Luca's first solo album and that really epic final track, King of the Nordic Twilight, which was like 11.5 minutes long. that's another one where it's just like there's no reason a 11-minute power metal song should be that good, and it is. And this one is no different. I think it ends the album just in such a strong, bombastic, I'll bring that word back again, just a really awesome way. And like you said, it brings back some of the musical themes from that first track, that instrumental track that led off the whole album, which kind of is a nice way of, you know, doing like just going in a circle and kind of finishing off where you started. This is such a great song. I definitely, for those not familiar with it, I definitely urge you to go and just listen to the whole damn song. If you can handle the kind of the cheesiness of it all, I think it's just so well done. And it's definitely I think a gem on this album.
You know, and the album is not short. It clocks in at over 55 minutes. And you sent me a message earlier today, almost like a reminder to check out Where Dragons Fly, which is kind of the B-side to the Emerald Sword single, and it's a bonus track in certain regions on this album. And as I went back and I listened to it, I don't remember this at all. I'm wondering if I've ever even heard this song, but I have to say that having now listened to it, it reminds me of like a medieval, or I should say like an RPG set in like a medieval universe. And it has like a bit of a ballad-like feel to it. Although it's kind of a nondescript song, I can certainly see why it was chosen for, you know, the bonus track. It didn't need to be on the album proper, but at the same time, there was a charm to it that I have to admit I kind of liked.
Yeah, I think it would have fit the album nicely, although it probably would have made the album feel a little bit bloated, I think. So, you know, things get cut. It makes sense. But it's kind of in that vein of you know, there's Forest of Unicorns on Legendary Tales, and there's Village of Dwarves from Dawn of Victory, and they're like these really over-the-top medieval style songs. And I feel like this one, although it's a little bit more, like you said, more ballad-esque, it is. I think it's definitely worth listening to. And they also have a remake of Land of Immortals where they kind of change up the instrumentation a little bit from the original version on Legendary Tales, and this is actually the version that ended up on that compilation that I mentioned earlier. But you know, if you're looking for a different way of hearing Land of Immortals, I guess you can check that out. But that's Symphony of Enchanted Lands. I had to go and get the box set off the shelf. I will never forget.
Must have cost a pretty penny.
Yeah, I remember using like a CD Now discount coupon or something to order this, and I ordered this and Pink Bubbles Go Ape and Chameleon all at the same time. And I remember,
I'm sure your dad was very happy with his credit card statement.
Well, I stayed home from school to intercept the mail. It literally, nice. And that was back when you had to guess when the mail was coming because there wasn't tracking numbers or anything. But for those who are watching the video version of the podcast, it came with a full colored, you know, book with all of these, you know, the story of the album, the story of the band, like bios for each of the band members, which I thought was super cool. You know, if you ever wanted to know what Luca Turilli's favorite movies were, or who his favorite actor is, or who he'd like to meet, or what his future plans are, you could actually see if those came true. Really interesting stuff. It also came with these, like, almost like they were like Rhapsody trading cards.
Oh my god!
Of each member of the band, some stickers and some tattoos.
I'm shocked you haven't used the tattoos.
No, I think this was just one of those things where I didn't want to mess with the. I just wanted to keep it as it was. I'm trying to see if I could make. This was the. I always thought this was really cool. The Rhapsody sword necklace.
Nice.
And then there was also a pin, which I'm sad that I never put this on my lapel and wore it to high school with my.
I'm sure the brothers at Chaminade would have thought very highly of.
I don't think they would have known how to react to something like that. So this was the first this is the first like box set that I ever owned, and so like it really has always held a really special place for me, and I've always like kept it, and I kept everything inside of it in good shape and left everything in the plastic and all that. So I have very fond memories of this album and getting this box set in the mail and just being excited about getting a piece of physical media in the mail, which is so rare these days, if not, non-existent for some people,
I do. I love seeing that. It makes me pine for the old days. I'm gonna give my score first here. Like I said, I had given Legendary Tales an 8.5. I think I actually like this album. It's a shade more. I thought that might happen going into it. It's an 8.75 for me. It's just a touch better. I think it's a little bit more complete. It's not perfect. It has its problems. Not least of which, it's hard for me to get into music when the thematic element is just not really in my wheelhouse. I have no problem playing in Dungeons and Dragons. I don't necessarily want to hear music about it. But that being said, the music is so good and the melodies are so infectious that I can't not give it a good score because it's a great album and probably my favorite Rhapsody album of all time.
I love it. I'm going to give it a lower score than I gave Legendary Tales, but a higher score than you gave it.
There you go.
I'm going to give it an 8.875, nestled in between 8.75 and 9. I still think it's a very good album. It's a blast to listen to. I think that it lacks the nostalgia factor of Legendary Tales being the first time I ever heard Rhapsody, and what a huge moment in my music listening history that was. I mean, that was such a big deal. I'll never forget hearing Warrior of Ice for the first time at Ralph's house and just being absolutely floored because I'd literally just started listening to metal, and now I'm hearing this, that it's unlike anything I'd ever heard before, and I knew that I needed to get into this band. And so, so this just happens to be the second album instead of the first. And I just think that I think that the greatness of the songs is a little bit more consistent on Legendary Tales. Warrior of Ice, Forest of Unicorns, Rage of the Winter, Flames of Revenge, Land of Immortals, Lord of the Thunder, the title track. I mean, every song is just so epic. And when we get to Dawn of Victory, which I would assume will be maybe late this year or maybe sometime next year, I'm going to have even more positive things to say. I think, just as a spoiler, time changes, but I think I probably will rank Dawn of Victory the highest of the three albums, at least based on re-listening to it today directly after Symphony of Enchanted Lands. I just think that overall I enjoy it more. But that's still to come. But that said, it's still a really like an all-time great album for me, and one of my favorite Rhapsody albums, honestly. I feel like the early stuff in particular just really, really resonated with me. And that whole, Emerald Sword saga that started with Legendary Tales and ended with Power of the Dragon Flame just has so many memorable songs on it that I think I would have a hard time making like a one disc long greatest hits album of just the songs from that era, because I think that it wouldn't fit everything I'd want to play on it onto one 80-minute, maximum disc. Not that we need to confine ourselves to that, but I still hold myself to that old standard of playlists having to be under 80 minutes because those are the rules. So.
Listen, I follow those rules with my playlist every single month. But that being said, I totally understand what you're saying. I'm sure we will get to all of this stuff and then some, in time. But good choice. Happy to go back to some of this stuff. It's been a little while, but I'm glad we could go back. There's a lot of news that I want to just bring up before we talk about next week. After 191 episodes, it finally happened. And I'm not even counting the bonus episodes that we do for our Patreon folks each month. but Winter Sun has announced their new album, Time 2. I never thought I would say those words. I'm still not convinced that it's done, despite the announcement.
Let's make it clear. The album was announced a very long time ago.
It was announced 15 years ago.
The album was announced to have been completed this week.
Right. So therein lies my question. Is this thing going to see the light of day? Because I heard that they actually started another Kickstarter for this thing. Is that possible?
Yeah, it is. I mean, oh my God, the meme worthiness on social media, it's good for a laugh. My understanding is that, and I could be wrong, so anybody who's listening, reach out and let me know if I've got my facts wrong. But the previous Kickstarter was not for Time 2; it was for
the studio or something.
And the album that preceded it, the Seasons album,
which was terrible.
Yeah, I know a lot of people were not a big fan of that. So, but I did see some people complaining that, this is a band that's on a pretty big label. I think they're on Nuclear Blast or Century Media, one of those bigger ones. And so, like, the idea of having a Kickstarter, I mean, hey, listen, the band's got a lot of fans. I'm sure that they're going to probably pull in another $1 million and they can do whatever it is they want with it. I'm glad that this isn't a band that I'm a big fan of, because to me, like, I feel like it's like extorting their fans. But, I mean, people, they have the option to give money or not give money. So whatever. I will definitely check out the album when it comes out. Hell, maybe we should just do an episode on it, because I think it's going to be just one of those things where everyone's going to have something to say about it and everyone's going to be listening to it. So we might as well throw our hat in the ring and throw in our 2 cents. But man, like, how do you live up to the hype of something like this?
It's impossible. You can't. It's going to be a flop, and I'm not hoping it flops. I just don't think it's going to live up to the hype. But we definitely at some point should do probably Time 1, and then we can always do Time 2 when that comes out.
We did do Time 1.
Did we really?
Yeah.
I completely forgot. All right, so there you go. So go back in the archives and I'll go listen to it again. I think I did. That being said, by the time
it was so memorable for you.
No, I like the album. I think I was excited to hear them because they were playing 70,000 Tons. So now it's coming back to me a little bit. But like, that was a long time ago that we did that. I think if
it was April of last year.
Oh, well, it's been a long year, my friend. It's been a long year. No, but anyway, I look forward to hearing this album. I think we should definitely do it. And just fascinating that it's finally coming out. In other news, I
heard you're getting VD on the ship this year.
I am so excited to get Vision Divine back. It's funny because as we talk about Rhapsody, don't think this didn't occur to me when they announced Vision Divine. Vision Divine has a new singer. I obviously have not seen the guy live, but Anger is on the ship. I would be shocked if Fabio Leone does not come out on stage with Vision Divine.
Oh, I would be very sad if I missed something like that.
I mean, I'm just saying, I think it's going to happen.
I mean, there's no reason why it shouldn't. I think everybody's on good terms and everything. So
yeah. I'm gonna reach out to Olaf Thorson, double alum of the show, and just tell him like this has to happen.
Yeah, him and Ash are our only dual interviewers or interviewees. So yeah, he's got a lot of clout here on the Metal Exchange, or maybe we have clout with him. I don't know.
There you go. That's what I'm saying.
I guess we'll see. We'll find out.
We're about to find out how much. Joey Vera, who is one of just the greatest live bass players I've ever seen, has parted ways with Merciful Fate, another band we covered in the archives. I only mention that because I feel like the guy is always busy with stuff, but for whatever reason, he doesn't stay in one place very long. But my God, what a fantastic bass player. And every time I've seen him live in different iterations, I always am blown away by not only his proficiency, but his live show presence is just fantastic. But he's decided to leave Merciful Fate. The hardest working band in the business, Terra Maze, is coming out with a new single. So I thought that was just something worth mentioning. I got some. What they said that I think it's coming out February 16th. The single is called Perfect World.
And
Not
it'll
surprising.
be released alongside a new EP and a new full-length album on the same day.
And a double live DVD that was recorded the same month. No, I joke, but they've been doing phenomenal work the last bunch of years, so I credit to them. And finally, some tour news. A tour that we actually spoke about briefly on our monthly Patreon chat with some of our Patreon folks, but Camelot has announced a U.S. tour, a second run of shows with help coming from not only Hammerfall in most markets, but Ad Infinitum. This is a powerhouse tour. We here in New York and a couple of other shows in the Northeast are not getting Hammerfall. We're getting Seven Spires instead. And I'm okay with that, having seen Hammerfall recently with Halloween. But this is a hell of a tour package that's coming to North America. And just so people know the dates, it's starting in Baltimore, Maryland on April 25th, finalizing or finishing up in Tampa, Florida on May 25th. So they're going out for about a month, hitting all corners of North America. Hell of a tour.
Yeah, that's a good one. It's great news for Ad Infinitum. I believe this is their first U.S. tour.
Yes.
So that's great for them. Great exposure. It's great for Camelot because it means that they'll have Melissa Bonney, on call for, her parts because she performs live with Camelot, or at least has been. She did the last tour and definitely did when the band played at Prague Power. That's a hell of a package. I hope that I can see it somehow. I don't know. It's everything is in flux right now. I was so excited, speaking of Joey Vera, to see that Armored Saint was playing a show in Rochester, and chances are by the time it happens, I won't even be here to see it.
What are the odds of that?
I know. It's like when Dream Theater came to Rochester and it happened to be the same night as Ralph's wedding, and I missed that too. So, they really got to run these things by you before they book Rochester, but alas, here we are. I'll have to make a call to Olaf as well.
Yes, so he can start scheduling the Armored Saint tours from now on, because talk about clout, right? So that brings us to next week. It's my turn, as you chose Rhapsody. And I want to talk about a band that you mentioned on your top 50 episode that we dropped last week. It's a band that was not on my list, and quite frankly, is a band that I just have not enjoyed as much as I did when I first heard them with this particular album, which, again, is now more than a decade old, which is crazy to me. But the band is Eclipse, the melodic hard rock stalwarts that they are at this point. They've been around the block for a while, but I want to talk about their 2012 release, Bleed and Scream, an album that, top to bottom, I think is by far their best. I would say by far, I don't say that lightly. I think it is by far their best album, their most complete album, top to bottom, and an album that when I first heard it was in constant rotation for me. But it's been a while since I've listened to it. We've never talked about them on the podcast in long form, and I think the time is now.
John Cena would agree, but this is a good one. This was also, I believe, my first Eclipse album, and it's a good one. I think that the band has evolved quite a bit since this album came out. They almost have a bit of almost a poppier kind of sound these days.
Probably why I like this album as much as I do, because it doesn't. I mean, not that I mind the poppy elements, but this album rocks. This one, there's some heavy hitters on this one, but the melody is there, and that's what I want to talk about, because there's some songs on here that are just some of my all-time favorites, 2 or 3 in particular, that just really stand out.
Yeah, I think this record, somebody heard it and literally gave birth to the Frontiers label that the next day.
Pretty much. I mean, this thing. I mean, when you think of Frontiers, you think of this album and then everything that came after it. So I think it'll be a fun conversation. I look forward to that. And then we have a couple of interesting episodes for early February lined up. I'm going to do a recap of 70,000 Tons of Metal like I did last year, kind of going through the good, the bad, and the ugly, and a request that we'll be doing the second week as a one-off in February, and I started listening to it today, and I'm sick to my stomach. I don't know.
Direct all your hate mail to Keith Nickel, PO Box.
Yeah,
666.
this is really tough, but we'll get through it, and other better times ahead. But should be fun. Let's thank all of our Patreon folks for supporting us and supporting the show. Please give us a like and a follow on any social media platform or even in your podcast app. It helps other people find the show. So thank you to all of you for supporting us. And good times ahead as we march on through 2024.
Hey, before we go, I don't know if you've heard this, but did you know that Graham Bonnet is going to have Van Williams and Mr. Jeff, what's his last name? Jeff Loomis.
It's funny.
On his next album.
I did hear that. I did hear that, and Graham broke the news today, I think, on his Facebook page. We had this scoop weeks ago, but I digress. Blabbermouth didn't seem interested when we let him know, but that's neither here nor there. So anyway, I'm glad that that's now official.
I think I look forward to hearing it. Scoop? It might be our first.
I think we've had other scoops, but this was that was a bigger one. That was a bigger one.
This is your biggest scoop since you worked at Scoops.
That's exactly right. They did call me Mr. King Scooper for a while, but story for another day, story for a bonus podcast maybe. But thanks to everyone for your support. We will check in with you next week as we do a melodic rock album that we haven't done many of throughout the course of the show, so it should be a fun one.
Agreed, and just a reminder, if you haven't listened to the new Crown album, get going on that, because that's... I got a text from one of our friends, Justin, yesterday, and he was listening to our episode and had some comments about it, and I said, go listen to that Crown album. You're gonna love it. It's a banger. So I don't know. By the time 20 years from now, I might look back on that and be like, that was the best album that came out in 2023. So we'll see.
It's possible. In fact, I'm going to go listen to it myself because I enjoyed it so much. But enjoy, my friend. I will catch up with you soon.
Sounds good, man. Take care.